Elder abuse is rampant.
It was my son that had pushed me and I had fallen.
And it thrives on silence.
I was held hostage, locked me in the back part of the house.
Unfortunately, it is going unreported.
She was murdered 15 minutes after she had called me.
It will start as maybe just mental abuse. Someone calling them stupid, you don't know what you're talking about. And then it may turn into financial. You have a few dollars missing from your wallet. You have maybe given someone your ATM card to run to the store for you. You give them the code and all of a sudden maybe there's some charges on there that you didn't authorize. It can start very slowly, but most of the time it is going to escalate over time. And I have many, many cases right now that unfortunately have escalated into death of the elder.
My mom was almost 56 when she passed. She was a mother of 8, and she was a grandmother. And she was very kind and sweet, and loved children and babies, loved to cook, and she was beautiful. She met the suspect online on a dating website. And when she had met him, he had stated his name was Domain, and it was false. He had stated that he was into religion and that he was a great guy. And she found out that that was false. All of it was false. Everything about him was false. My mom had a teenage boy living at home and she was having problems with him, and he said he was going to come down and help her raise him, get things in order because she was at her wit's end. It was her last child at home. She was getting older. The father wasn't involved and she needed help, and she was desperate. And he had said, you know, we'll go to church, we'll get involved with him, we'll straighten him out, we'll do this together. And she thought she had a partner coming down to help her get through the hard time in her life. There's just something that just was kind of creepy about him, but my mom was in love with him, so I tried to accept it for her. He just, he didn't want to work, he didn't have a job, but he wanted to come down and move with my mom, and I felt like he was going to try to live off of her. And then as soon as he'd moved in with her, me and my mom were very close. She stopped talking to me as much. She became depressed. She didn't want to worry me with her problems, and I knew something was wrong. She had told me he stole some things from her house that was involved. And she said, should I report this? And I said, yes, you should report it. He has stole her dog.
Yeah, if they suspect it for any reason, they should be watching out for isolation, so that they start pitting you against people that you regularly are friends with, your loved ones, etc. If they try and separate you from the people that are your close friends, your close relatives, it's so that they can control the information that you have access to. And it clouds judgment. It means that you're only relying on one person to give you everything in terms of information, and they'll use that as a means of controlling and essentially starting to take over those finances, making you more dependent upon them.
Had this gal that wanted to be a care provider. She, I don't know, maybe she was in her middle 20s or early 30s, I don't remember. But when she first came in, she, did what she was supposed to do. She cleaned the house and, made me a meal. So after a period of time, next thing I know, things started disappearing out of the house. And in my heart of hearts, I knew it was her. But she would say, oh, you misplaced it, or oh, you lost that. But there were some very valuable things that my wife and I had from our travels all over the world. And as far as, I don't know what she did with them. She probably took them down to the pawn shop, hawked them, or I don't know. But more and more things started coming up missing. I hate to say it, but she snookered me. She suckered me. I've given her money all the time. Over the past few months, I'm sure I've given her several thousands of dollars. I've drained my bank account. And anything she needed, I paid for her rent and her electricity bill.
And a lot of times they're lonely sometimes. They're looking for companionship. And wherever they can find that companionship, that person is going to have a real advantage over the victim, because the victim is so desperate for companionship, just as I think any person might be. But I think an elder person is even more so, because they're in their later years. They know that time's, winding down, so to speak, and so they don't want to be alone. And they allow people into their lives, whether it be a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a caretaker, somebody that says, you know what, I'm going to move in and I'm just going to take care of you, and I'll pay you some rent, or maybe I'll take care of you and I'll do your lawn and things like that in exchange for me staying here. And suddenly that person, within a few weeks, a month, has control of the checkbook. And the victim says, well, I gave him my checkbook so he could pay all the bills in the house. So then it's hard to prove that a crime was committed, because the victim did give the suspect permission to write checks out of the checking account, to pay the bills, to take care of the house. And because the victim wants that companionship, again, they're not going to want to call and report it. They don't want to say, stop spending my money, because they know that person's going to leave when the money stops, basically. And so I think a lot of the same issues with physical abuse as well as financial abuse on the reporting end is the same.
When I ran out of money for the favors she was giving me, she said I could sign over my trailer to her. And I own it. I've owned it for years and years. So I just got the documentation out of my filing cabinet. It took a while to find it. And signed over my trailer. Well, next thing I know, she starts moving me out. One day she put me in the car and dropped me off at the regional hospital. Just pulled up and dropped me off and said, go in that door, and drove away.
Typically what we start to see in those situations is they're trying to take over more and more of those finances. Or, you know what, I need more gifts. I'll pay more attention to you if you buy me more things. Anything that involves kind of using that money as a leverage to affection or extra attention. They charge you basically for anything that's going on, and their time has now got a dollar amount associated with it.
And I lived alone for a long time, but then my son had gotten into some difficulties at his job and was unemployed for a long time, and he needed a place to stay. So he came to live with me, and I didn't mind that at all, because I could have used some help around the house, and maybe he could go to the store for me or pick up my medications. But I didn't realize that my son had a problem that got increasingly worse. He started using drugs, and again, I think that, I'm not sure which drugs, but I was told that it was something called methamphetamine, and things started to disappear around the house. I had some pieces of jewelry disappear that, again, they were very dear to me because my late husband had given those to me. And when I asked him if he had seen them or knew what happened to them, he just got mad at me and, started yelling at me. So I didn't know what happened, and I felt bad. I felt like I was accusing him of taking it. But then things kept getting lost and disappearing. And one day I asked him to go to the store for me to get some groceries because I was having some trouble with my hip. I had been in the hospital getting some hip work done, so I just didn't feel like going to the store at that time. So I gave him my debit card to go get some money to pay for the groceries. So when he came back, it took him a while. He did come back, and he did have some of the groceries that I asked for, but he refused to give the debit card back, saying that he might need it again to get something that I needed for the household. And I thought, well, that's okay, because it's my son. And
the ongoing concerns we run into are people that will, take in somebody or they trust someone that probably isn't someone that they should be trusting. And we also see a lot of victims who are being abused by their family members and not understanding processes that could help them or willing to accept help sometimes to get them out of that bad situation. I think some people don't really understand what they're doing at that time. They trust the person that is there, and they think the situation is going to improve. It's just a one-off. This may have happened only this one time, and I know that that's not going to happen again. And the next thing you know, it's happening again, and it's more vicious than it was the first time. And it tends to escalate and build and becomes a much bigger issue.
And then I discovered that my bank account was a lot lower than I thought it should be. And I asked him about it, and I asked him for the card back. And he went into a rage. And we kind of got into a little bit of a physical struggle, and he pushed me really hard, and I fell very hard on the floor and ended up having to get taken to the hospital in an ambulance because it was really bad.
Well, anytime it's come to a physical force situation, it's really a bad situation at that point. Earlier warning signs are that the person may be starting to show signs of mental illness, so they're confused, or they become overly reliant, overly dependent. Maybe they're abusing substances, alcohol, drugs, any of those other types of things that cause them not to be the person that you really know or knew, and you see this change in their behaviors. So if you see a change in the behavior of the person that you're relying upon, that is one of the red flags. Next would be you start seeing your own accounts changing. So you see withdrawals that you didn't authorize, or your cards start missing, your checks start missing. Any of those things that show a financial pattern might have occurred. We also see instances where people just aren't prepared for the fact that they're taking on the care of someone else. So some of our caregivers become burnt out, and that's one of the things that you have to watch for, is your caregiver becoming frustrated with the whole situation, and are they no longer able to do so in a empathetic way? They understand what's actually happening, or are they just blaming people for everything else that's happening?
And then they sent me to the rehab hospital, and while I was there I was talking to the social worker, and I told her what happened, and she told me that that was not good, and that that she even used the word abuse, and that she had to report this. So I didn't want her to do that. I mean, this is my son. I mean, he's a good boy. He grew up right. This was just something that happened that probably was my fault because I asked them for the card back.
The hospital is obligated to report, and they have to report any type of suspected abuse. However, a person is able to consent to any discharge that they want to discharge to, if they want to discharge to that person. Unfortunately, they can't be held against their will, but that is why it's so crucial that law enforcement gets involved in order to let her know what her options are, let her know that's not okay, and getting the resources that that person could probably be entitled to with consent, of course. So there's restraining orders that you can put for this loved one. But at the end of the day, it's your decision. And that decision could mean that you might end up in a coffin, or you might end up in a skilled nursing facility because you agreed to continue to live and have this person be involved in your life that has been physically abusing you.
She started paying a lot of attention, and she told me that she had to report this to the police. And I was shocked. And I told her, no, you can't do that, because what happens if they talk to my son? What if they come here? I'm going to have to tell them what happened. But she said she had to. So while I was, in the rehab, the police came and talked to me. I was so embarrassed in front of all these people here. The police came and took me to a room and started asking me all these questions about what had happened. And frankly, I didn't want to tell them what had really happened, because I didn't want my son to get into trouble.
That first push is a sign, and you need to report it. And when that happens, if they get into the system, it's a misdemeanor that gets them into counseling, requires counseling, and that's what you want for them. They're not going to go to jail over that first push. They might get arrested that night and spend a night or two in jail, but they're going to be placed on probation. They're going to be required to get the help that they need to, and that's what your goal is. That's what you want to do. You want to stop it early. You want to make that person understand early on, it's not okay to push me, it's not okay to hurt me, and you need help, and you need to get that help before you can be around me.
A lot of times we see people that are fearful of, I don't want them to go to jail, I don't want them to go into these other things, when reality is that might force them to realize they need to do something different. And that becomes their wake-up call sometimes rather than any of these other measures that come into play. The biggest fear a lot of people have when they hear about Adult Protective Services is a fear that we're going to come in and remove somebody from their home or their environment. And that isn't what our goal or objective is. That isn't even something that we can legally do. The only time that a person could be removed from their home is a result of being unable to protect themselves due to unable to provide for food, clothing, and shelter as a result of a mental illness or a danger to themselves or a danger to others. If a person ever feels like they're being abused or any of those types of things, they should be aware all the services that are out there are to try and help them and protect them and help them hopefully get out of that bad situation and into a better situation. So whether it's Adult Protective Services, the Long-Term Care Ombudsman, or even law enforcement, we're there to try and assist you, and if you talk with us and you work with us, we'll help find ways to get you into a better situation.
Living at home, of course, they can keep you isolated from your family, and a lot of times victims don't even see it that way. So if they are at home, they fully depend on this person possibly. If they end up in an assisted living, of course all of their income possibly would end up paying for that assisted living care.
There comes a point in any abuse situation where your ability to make decisions for yourself may not be at the best, because you may be concerned about what the repercussions will be to the other person. And at those points, it sometimes is incumbent upon law enforcement or our office to really ensure that the legal processes are occurring. So if you've been a victim of major assaults, the DA's office and law enforcement will seek prosecution not only for your protection, but other people's protection. If they're doing that towards you, likelihood is that they will still go towards someone else. And even though you're trying to protect that person, really you may not be protecting them in the long run. You may just be adding to an issue that's going to get much worse.
A lot of times we have to speak to the victim and make them understand that by prosecuting them and by coming to court, you actually are helping them, because the only way for us to force anybody to get help, mental health treatment, drug treatment, whatever it might be, is if they're on felony probation. When you tell me the only thing you want is for them to get help, the victim has to help me to do that, and so they need to come to court. And a lot of times we will give them a break the first time, the suspect, but then they repeat, and we can't give them such a break the second time. It's very hard to make them understand that you should not feel guilty. You did not do anything wrong. It's just such as when we're prosecuting a child molest case, we have to explain to that child they did not do anything wrong, or a domestic violence victim, you did not do anything wrong. Yes, you love that person and you want to see that person be okay, but the bottom line is that they're not okay right now, and to get them help or to change their behaviors in any way, there has to be some intervention in the criminal justice part of it, and that's what we have to do.
Trying to seek a safety plan, having a place to go that you can get to reliably, that gets you that distance, and you can really work out the problem that's at hand. Utilizing Adult Protective Services, utilizing law enforcement, utilizing those emergency services that will keep you protected in that instance and give you the time to regroup and find what you really need to focus on next.
I think that they should notify the police and let them know that there's someone on that they're talking to that they're not themselves, that they're lying to you, and that they're probably lying to other people, and they have a criminal past, and that's probably their job. That's what they do for a living. They prey upon people to get what they want, and they don't care at what expense that it is, and it's probably your life in the end.
If it doesn't look right, doesn't smell right, guess what? It ain't right. Time to pay attention to those things, and the people that really love you, your family, when they give you those warnings, you need to pay attention to them too. Because it doesn't matter how smart you are, how many diplomas you have on the walls, when you're vulnerable, elderly, and needy, there's somebody out there that's going to know that and sense that and come and knock at your door. And they're going to look like they're nice as pie, but they're not. If you're that man right now, if you're that guy living alone and you're lonely, and you got that person, that young gal coming in, making you feel good in ways that they shouldn't be doing it, or even making you feel good just for giving you attention, but things are disappearing, time to put a stop to it now. You end it now. And if it doesn't end now, you call Asian Adult Services and say, help me end this now. And they will.
As an individual who has been victimized, or if you have a family member who's been victimized, just know that victim services are available to you, to them. Let the officer know that you would like a victim advocate there at the scene, or at least within the next day or two. We can help you if we can get in the earliest possible time and get you those resources that you need at that time. If it's a situation where an officer comes and a victim is victimized by their caretaker, now we have to provide some sort of care for you, for your family member. And there are resources available. Aging and Adult Services, Adult Protective Services, they have programs to where they can get a caregiver that will come to the home. And we work very closely with both of those agencies. Victim Services does not directly provide shelter. However, in certain situations, we can apply to the state. It's the State Victims Compensation Board. And we can apply for certain monies. We also have emergency funds that are available for certain circumstances. So that's why it's imperative that you get hooked up with a victim advocate right away as soon as the victimization occurs.